But what was it? Stop with it, kid.
But it's kind of like a mass that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Hello, I'm Guido Girgenti.
And I'm Amira Hassan.
And you're listening to Bloc Party, a show about the different blocks of legislators in Congress making deals, getting into fights, and the movements outside Congress causing good trouble. Amira, you were really on time with that intro.
I will never not catch a beat. So this week we're going to be talking about foreign policy, which I was told to find my hook to figure out when I could talk about Emily in Paris. Oh, no. And here it is. Emily in Paris. This is the episode.
Uh-huh. What?
Guido's looking at me like I am ruining his show, but you know what? International diplomacy. Hello.
We're open to a sequel to this episode on Emily in Paris.
I mean, wait. What do you mean a sequel? I was promised an episode now, though.
Amira, thank you for volunteering. We're excited to announce that Amira is hosting a Festivus special on foreign policy and Emily in Paris. Isn't that right?
Let's do it.
Okay. This week, 2 one-on-one conversations, both of them linked by a single question. Amira, what happened to the foreign policy consensus in D.C. when Congressman-elect Jamaal Bowman unseated the hawkish chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Eliot Engel, in June of 2020?
And our critique of Congressman Engel is you cannot call yourself a progressive when you're accountable to corporate PACs and weapons manufacturers. And when you look at his voting record, allowing the sale of cluster bombs to Saudi Arabia, opposing Barack Obama's signature foreign policy, which is the Iran deal, Eliot Engel opposed that deal.
Breaking news in campaign 2020, Jamaal Bowman has been declared the winner over incumbent Congressman Eliot Engel. It's a huge upset for Engel, who has served 16 terms in Congress and was chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Well, Guido, you want to talk about the foreign policy consensus? Let me tell you something. Here in D.C., you hop on the red line, go up to Bethesda, you go to that's the suburb here.
Of course, Bethesda.
And Lockheed Martin Defense Manufacturing Corporation headquarters, right there, right?
In the suburb.
Yep, you hop off the metro. Let's say you work on the Hill on your way to work. Mm-hmm. You walk onto the platform, and you know what you see? An ad for Raytheon. Another defense manufacturing corporation.
I did see that when I lived in D.C.
Oh, my. I wish our paths had crossed when you lived in D.C. Anyways, I digress.
No, that was the Obama presidency.
I wasn't here yet. So, yeah, you realize a lot of people work in this town and their jobs are connected in a way of conducting foreign policy that, kind of assumes force is good.
Yeah, like their job is to buy Subway ads for Raytheon.
Listen, I'm not judging. However, there's this idea, this consensus, right, that U.S. military power will always be wielded benevolently. It is good to build up the power and the might of the Pentagon and the defense contractors, make a lot of money, and also set the agenda here in D.C. And that's why Obama's senior foreign policy aides started referring to all of that, this entire ecosystem, as the Blob.
It's indestructible. It's indescribable. Nothing can stop it.
Yes, the Blob, a thing, a real thing that people say to describe the entrenched status quo of foreign policy making. And when I learned that, I realized this question I asked about Jamaal Bowman's win, how much did that earthquake in the Bronx and Westchester reverberate down in D.C.? Well, maybe before I could answer that, I needed to know more about criticisms of the Blob progressives had been making for decades, and some of the work that had happened in the belly of the beast before these past upset wins. So to figure that out, I sat down one-on-one with Matt Duss, Bernie Sanders' foreign policy advisor. We talked about the constraints of the D.C. consensus that Matt experienced early in his career, and also the positive vision for foreign policy that he has been developing in Senator Sanders' office on Capitol Hill. Here's Matt Duss. Enjoy.
At the outset, I think it is important to recognize that the world of today is very, very different from the world of Winston Churchill back in 1946. Back then, we faced a superpower adversary with a huge standing army, with an arsenal of nuclear weapons, with allies around the world, and with expansionist aims. Today, the Soviet Union no longer exists. This planet will not be secure or peaceful when so few have so much and so many have so little.
Matt Duss, welcome to Block Party.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. It's a little rainy and gray outside, just like I like it.
So, Matt, let's just start with some clear definitions. When people in D.C. refer to the Blob, what are they talking about?
I think this was a term that was first introduced by Ben Rhodes, an advisor to President Obama. And basically, it's just a shorthand for a kind of D.C. foreign policy groupthink, or a kind of set of assumptions that have guided or limited the kind of range of policy options that exist when we talk about foreign policy. I think some folks use the term the blob to refer to basically anyone who works in Washington foreign policy, and I don't think that's right or useful, because I do think it's very much worth recognizing that there are folks who have worked in Washington for a long time who have been trying to offer different alternatives and who have been critical. And especially after Obama came into office in January 2009, I think there were a number of us who were really continuing to push forward on what we believe to be, essentially Obama's critique of foreign policy. I think Obama had this great line that I've referenced numerous times in the 2008 primary, where he was talking about his opposition to the Iraq War, where he said, I don't want to just end the war, I want to end the mindset that got us into this war in the first place. And I think that's a great encapsulation of what I see as the progressive foreign policy project. The blob is essentially another term for that mindset, just this kind of very military-oriented, very American power-oriented, it is a kind of a vision, a sort of quasi-religious vision of American global military hegemony, where American power can really do anything.
The blob is the mindset that got us into the Iraq War. I can't help but think that the 2000s and the Bush era are not an easy time to start one's career in the world of progressive foreign policy. What's driving you to this work?
Well, I'd always kind of been interested in global issues, but also particularly in Middle East issues, in part because I was raised in the evangelical church. And so that kind of biblical history always had an interest and a fascination for me. But then what really pushed it into a real kind of more serious interest was going to Istanbul, Turkey for the first time. Just being there and seeing and smelling and hearing and tasting what Istanbul had to offer got me much, much more interested in Turkey, but also in the region and in the history of Islam. My wife and I went there for a very close friend of mine. He was getting married in Istanbul, and so we went and we had dinner with his to-be in-laws family, in this beautiful backyard they had, and we drank and ate into the night, and woke up the next morning. I was awakened by the sound of the call to prayer, which I didn't know what it was. I knew that this is something that happened in Istanbul and in Muslim countries and communities, but I had never really experienced it before. And the sound of that was incredible. It was scary, it was beautiful, it was musical, it was all these different things kind of at the same time. And again, the thing about Istanbul is that you've got so many mosques and minarets, and all of these minarets are all strung up with these very, very old speaker systems, and they're all going at the same time, and so they're echoing and feeding back off of each other. So you definitely had this kind of cacophonous, beautiful, but yet chaotic at the same time. I wanted to kind of understand the different aspects, what that sound really meant, and so I think that's probably the best way to kind of describe what really got me into the next level of interest in the region.
Thank you. And then where did that lead you?
Well, when I came back and started to read more about Turkey, about Islam, and about the region and its history, read enough to know that once 9/11 happened in September of 2011, so much of what was being, fed to us and just poured out from our radios and from our TVs, from the talking heads, from our op-ed pages, was really not the entire story. I was just really, really concerned that we seemed, the country seemed to be being whipped up, into kind of this global conflict on the basis of what I saw as a pretty clear misrepresentation of the Islamic faith and of Muslims around the world.
For our younger listeners who may not remember the run-up to the Iraq War, could you give us an example of a moment where you heard something and were just like, I just know that is not true?
I do remember this one piece by, the conservative journalist Jonah Goldberg, who was quoting another conservative so-called expert who was saying, and I'm trying to get this as close to verbatim as possible, which was, every once in a while, the United States just needs to go out and pick up some crappy country and throw it against the wall to show the rest of the world we mean business. I mean, and this was the mentality that was driving this at this time. This is the mentality that got us into Iraq. And I think we've seen the disastrous consequences of that.
So what happens when you bring this criticism of the Blob that's been sharpened in the Bush era, and you bring it into the Obama era? With Obama in office, progressives like you are closer to power, but do you then encounter the Blob in a more personal and a more first-hand way because you're closer to that power?
So my first personal encounter with the Blob, even though that term didn't exist or wasn't in use then, was probably back in 2008 when I started working at the Center for American Progress, which is a very big, influential, Democratic-aligned think tank. It was founded by John Podesta during the Iraq War, and it helped marshal a lot of democratic, liberal, progressive energy against the Iraq War on a number of other issues. So there was a speech given by former Senator Joe Lieberman, thankfully, former Senator Joe Lieberman, who was, a very hawkish Democrat, or independent, I guess, at that point. But, it was one of these typically hawkish anti-Iran speeches, where he was essentially saying that in order to, prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, we needed to just explicitly threaten Iran with war. And I just think that's crazy. I mean, we're in the middle of the Iraq War. Tens, probably hundreds of thousands had already died. Millions had been displaced. Thousands of Americans killed, many times that wounded. And it's just that, I think, is kind of emblematic of the kind of reckless and just careless way that so many hawks in Washington talk about violence. It has no respect for the actual human costs that these kinds of policies. I mean, what would it actually mean to have a war with Iran? I mean, if you're going to threaten it, let's talk about what that would really be like. So I wrote a piece kind of criticizing that speech and took a pretty heavy hit at him that I thought was well-deserved. And then I started to hear from some other colleagues at CAP who were like, oh, you shouldn't go after Lieberman like this, for this reason, for that reason, he's respected, or, he's saying things that are, quote, within the consensus, which is a term that is often used or was often used to kind of justify not taking courageous stands. Oh, that's outside the consensus. I was like, well, what does that mean? If the consensus is bad, then it's bad. You should be, willing to say so. But it was also like, well, we're trying to do other things not related to foreign policy with Joe Lieberman, and we need his support. And if you criticize him on this, we're going to be less likely to get him to help us on that. And, I get that. I mean, coalition politics involves, you want to work with people with whom you don't agree on every little thing. But I tend to think that advocating for wars that will get, hundreds of thousands of people killed and create millions of refugees and cost trillions of dollars is a pretty serious, minus on your record that suggests you're not probably going to be the best ally to advance a broader progressive agenda. So that was my take on that. But that, one time I definitely noticed when there was some pushback on, me for writing something that was just entirely true and fair and yet inconvenient.
Wow, that is a upsetting but illuminating story about DC, and I'm sure not the last. You know, in hearing these stories about Lieberman, about the Iraq War, you hear these echoes again and again about an existential threat, a defining conflict between the United States and some menace that must be vanquished, maybe with military force. Part of what feels different about today is that in the past, the left did not have an equal platform and maybe did not have as solid, as unified of a consensus for our own theory, our own positive vision that answers the questions, what is the defining issue or the defining conflict in the world today? And so it feels quite different when in 2017, Senator Bernie Sanders unveils a big foreign policy speech. You work with him on the speech, of course, as his advisor. And you choose Westminster College as the venue for the speech, the same college that hosted Winston Churchill in 1946 for his Iron Curtain speech, announcing the start of the Cold War. Why the nod to a speech like Churchill's, the Iron Curtain?
I think the location and the venue for that speech was significant. You know, obviously, Senator Sanders doesn't subscribe to Winston Churchill's, a lot of Winston Churchill's views, but it was, I think purposely chosen because that speech at Westminster is understood in retrospect to have helped define, for better or worse, an era of foreign policy. The Cold War, the Iron Curtain. This is how I think American foreign policy and the foreign policy and security policy of our allies, particularly in Europe, were arranged for the following decades. And Senator Sanders felt like this is a moment to define a new vision for American foreign policy, and that's what he was trying to do in that speech. But the one thing I would also add here is that he talked a lot in that speech and has talked subsequently in more detail about the rise of kind of oligarchy and authoritarianism and the way that corruption feeds both of these things. And that's, I think, a particularly key insight in this moment that has started to get a lot more attention in the years since then.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the thesis Bernie presents in that speech on rising authoritarianism, because Churchill's Iron Curtain speech is successful if he convinces a lot of people in the public, in the press, in government, to adopt the Iron Curtain as the defining metaphor of that era in global politics. Given Bernie's nod to Churchill's speech, I'm wondering, in developing that speech, what was the core case for why the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism and the threats of inequality and corruption could provide the scaffolding for a new progressive vision of international politics? What was that case? What was that story?
There is just this sense among a lot of people. It exists in the United States. It exists in countries in Europe and a number of kind of what we would call advanced democracies, that a lot of people have been left behind. Their own incomes have not risen. They've watched others in their countries and communities become extremely wealthy. They feel that the system is not working for them. It's not offering a better future for them or for their children. They see a kind of self-dealing political elites taking care of themselves and enjoying the spoils of economic growth, and they're not being spread around. There's political inequality, there's racial inequality, but there's definitely a relationship between all these things. And you have in these situations demagogues, just classic figures that have been written about for many, many years, going back to the ancient Greeks, who exploit these grievances. Donald Trump is one such person. I think Vladimir Putin is another such person. You've got basically this kind of, as Bernie has called it, an axis of authoritarians. They share certain attributes where they're just kind of inciting hatred against different groups, whether it's immigrants, whether it's Muslims, whether it's gay and lesbian citizens. They're inciting hatred to boost their own power. They're posing as, opponents of corruption, while at the same time taking the spoils of that corruption. I think the point that Senator Sanders was making here is like, if we are going to actually have a new and more effective foreign policy that promotes the real security and the real prosperity of the American people, we really need to look at some of these issues of economic and political and racial inequality that have been plaguing our country. And I think you've seen a lot of people continue to make that connection. Even, I would say, President-elect Joe Biden. I think if you look at his foreign affairs speech that he published a few months ago, there was a strong recognition that, in order to actually have a durable and effective foreign policy, we have to look to some of these enduring political cleavages in our country and begin to address them so we can build a consensus in which to root any foreign policy for the future.
There's also this subtle shift Bernie makes with the language he uses. From Churchill's Iron Curtain speech to Lieberman saying we need to be ready for war with Iran, all of those, Cold War to War on Terror, have at their foundation a deeply held assumption that the American people, the American government, the American military, the USA, all of that is a single entity when it comes to the international stage. There's a clear single national interest.
Right.
But in Sanders' speech, you hear this distinguishing between governments and the people they govern in this way that allows him to reground foreign policy in the principles of small d democracy.
In kind of articulating this global challenge of rising authoritarianism and rising ultranationalism and oligarchy, there is a commitment, I think, to this idea of universal rights. The idea that, and again, I think this is part of what I think, and I think Senator Sanders believes is part of being a progressive, which is to say, listen, the responsibility of the American government in terms of foreign policy is to advance the security and the prosperity of the American people, first and foremost. But as progressives, we understand that we have responsibilities and obligations to people around the world. We act in a sense of solidarity with people all around the world, and understanding that the actions we take, the policies we pursue, to advance our security and prosperity, we need to pay attention to the effects that these policies have on, less powerful populations around the world. I think the global war on terror is a perfect example of that. I mean, we've been, at war for almost 20 years. It's been enormously destabilizing to the Middle East region and beyond. In many ways, I think we've seeded future conflicts by the way we've carried out these wars. When you look at the kind of xenophobic, anti-Muslim, generally violent, triumphalist rhetoric upon which so much of this, aggressive foreign policy has been argued, it has really corroded our own politics. Donald Trump, and this is not original to me, I think others have made this argument, Donald Trump is in many ways a product of the global war on terror and the whole narrative that was developed around Muslims and how, Muslims are a source of violence and insecurity for us, whether it's, in the Middle East or it's immigrants, coming from Mexico or from other countries in Central and South America. We've just securitized our entire foreign policy debate and seen it through the lens of the global war on terror in a way that has really just been destructive to our own politics and created an environment in which a demagogue like Donald Trump can thrive.
Is that the gravitational pull of the Blob? Is that you go to work in D.C. on foreign policy and you are sort of constantly pulled towards hawkish, xenophobic arguments?
I think that is part of it. I mean, the way I'd put it, for an example, I think you saw around now that the global war on terror is becoming, less of the defining issue for Washington, we've seen everyone sort of shifting to China, right? China is now the new big thing, and in the same way that I think a lot of Washington sort of slotted out the Soviet Union after the Cold War and then slotted in terrorism as like, this is the new kind of unifying concept for a foreign policy. You see this being done with China. And I think for hawks, their goal is to kind of set up a race who can be more hawkish, right? And I think Democrats, unfortunately, play into that by just jumping at any opportunities to demonstrate that we are the more hawkish ones. We're the tougher ones. We're going to be tougher on China, right? It's an argument that is designed for Republicans to win and for Democrats to lose, because Republicans will always double down on being more hawkish and more crazy and more xenophobic. So let's just not even get into this bidding war.
And when you look at the portfolio of foreign policy issues that the Biden administration will be taking on, are you worried at this moment about the gravitational pull of the who can be the most hawkish bidding war? Or do you see opportunities for a different kind of issue to define the agenda?
I think looking at the issues of like climate change, for example, it's like you can't bomb climate change, right? This is just something that we need to first recognize as the problem, and we need to recognize that we need to build cooperation to deal with this problem. I mean, there's no way around it. And again, I think this is why one of the reasons I'm so encouraged that the Biden team has made foreign policy such a primary issue. I mean, I do think, as your listeners I'm sure have noticed, I mean, announcing Secretary Kerry as a special envoy for climate change in that first group of national security officials, essentially, raising his climate change guy to the level of a cabinet official is a really important signal, both to the American people and to the world, of how seriously the United States is going to be taking this problem.
Well, I will take that bit of optimism and ask an optimistic question. So let's assume that this nascent progressive foreign policy consensus does become stronger in the Biden era, grows in its scope and its clarity. What do you expect will be the defining principles of that consensus? The principles that provide a foundation of unity and direction for progressives.
We can't take an approach that simply exports our own insecurity onto others. We need to really pay close attention to the impact that our policies have on communities abroad, whether we're talking about, the use of airstrikes, drone strikes, our support for wars like the Saudi war in Yemen, which is the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. We are implicated in that. We are selling them weapons. We are helping them with intelligence. They are longtime partners in the region. The American people have a stake in what's going on there and a responsibility to stop supporting it and to do our best to bring it to an end. One other point that's related to that is, international law matters. International norms matters. And if we believe that, then we need to understand that we should agree to be bound by those norms. If we want to build a more peaceful world that's not just governed by might makes right, we can't simply decide on one set of rules for us and our friends and another set of rules for our adversaries. And the last point I would make here is just treat discussions of violence with the respect they deserve. There's a tendency in Washington to kind of attribute seriousness to anyone who's willing to talk about the use of force.
Is this part of the Blob mindset?
Yes, exactly right. There's this sense in Washington among national security folks that kind of military force is decisive in a way that diplomacy or some other tools are not. And that's just false. And here I'm thinking of this statement from John Bolton. It was a tweet back in January of this year after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, who was a very top commander, one of the most respected and revered commanders in Iran. And this strike killed him, and it killed an Iraqi militia leader. And Bolton tweeted praise for Trump for taking this decisive action. They love that word, decisive. It's like, well, what did it decide? I mean, it decided that Qasem Soleimani was no longer alive, but it didn't, address the problems it was supposedly meant to address. I mean, Iran has continued in all the activities that assassination was supposedly going to stop. It has continued to advance its nuclear program in ways that we and our allies don't want. It has continued, support for different extremist groups in the region. But still, you saw the acclamation on the part of the right, and unfortunately even some in the center, for this act of violence, because it was just kind of false sense like, oh, we've done something bold here. It's like, well, what did you do? You didn't end anything. You just started something new. And so I think pushing back on this idea that military violence is decisive in a way that, say, diplomacy is not, is a real core part of the progressive project as well. Because just recognizing that, violence can change things. It can change things for the bad, and things can spiral and escalate very, very quickly in ways that we simply cannot predict. And I think our discussions in Washington on the use of violence often don't respect that as much as they should.
Thank you. I'm interested how much you think the rise of the squad has opened space for an alternative to the Blob's mindset, and specifically, what's the impact of a Democrat like Eliot Engel and what he represents in terms of foreign policy in the Democratic Party, his defeat to a Democrat like Jamaal Bowman?
Congressman-elect Bowman beating Eliot Engel, and I'm going to keep calling him Congress-elect Bowman just because I love saying that. It was a huge moment, right? Because let's just go into who Eliot Engel is. As you said, he was the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the most powerful House Democrat on the issue of foreign policies. And he was a total hawk, who's someone who I think is, not on every issue, but on a lot of issues, and particularly issues I and a lot of progressives care about, like the Middle East, like Iran, like Israel, Palestine, was very much to the right of the Democratic Party. So anyway, you had, Jamaal Bowman come out and challenge Engel on a whole range of issues. Foreign policy was one of them. And I think, Congressman-elect Bowman showed that, no, you can actually articulate a smart, progressive vision of foreign policy, one that is rooted in a vision of dignity and security for all people in our country and around the world, and win. When you can defeat the most powerful foreign policy Democrat in the House, people take notice. And I think that's good. I think we've already seen the candidates, all the candidates for the new House Foreign Affairs Committee chair, recognizing that. They're all going to be supportive of rejoining the JCPOA, as Joe Biden has. The JCPOA is the term for the Iran deal. They've also been supportive of diplomacy with Iran. There are going to be costs if you oppose the effort to rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement. There are going to be costs if you're out there joining with the hawks to support militarism, because there's now a larger contingent of progressive foreign policy voices in Congress, but they are backed up. These are voices in the hall of power, and they are rolling with a crew, and that is really, really exciting.
I'm interested in advice that you have as someone who I think has been both an insider and an outsider in the world of Washington, D.C. foreign policy. It reminds me of what the advice Larry Summers gave to Warren. Larry Summers said to Elizabeth Warren, you have a choice. You could be an insider or an outsider. Outsiders can say whatever they want, but people on the inside don't listen to them. Insiders, however, get lots of access and a chance to push their ideas. People, powerful people, listen to what the insiders have to say. But insiders also understand one unbreakable rule. They don't criticize other insiders. I think you've navigated a career of being on the inside of Democratic think tanks. You work for a Senate office. You work on the inside of government, although it is Senator Bernie Sanders' office. How do you balance the trade-offs of inside-outside strategy?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important question. And I would say, I think that idea, you're right, that's a famous quote from Larry Summers. I mean, this idea you never criticize other insiders, that's a great way to just regenerate the same old ideas, which is something we've seen from Larry Summers. But fortunately, I don't think Senator Warren listened to that. That's certainly not something that Bernie Sanders has listened to. I think it's important, first of all, to know the critique you're going to make. Understand the fight that you're going to pick, and, pick the right fights. Because ultimately, we're not going to move the ball on these issues without picking fights. And there's no need to be rude about it. But the bottom line is these are really important issues. These are really important policy debates, and we need to be willing to go at them aggressively and with soul. That's what I've tried to do.
What advice do you have on picking the right fight?
I would say, and this is something I tell to, when I speak to younger folks, as I do whenever I have the opportunity or whenever I'm asked, is just understand your own principles. Like, think through your own values and the kind of person and the kind of, and the kind of career you want to have. Think about, what really are the principles that define you. Because at some point you'll be asked to compromise those principles. And this Washington is full of opportunities and is by design, full of opportunities to compromise on those principles. But the best way, I think, to make the best choice when those moments arise is to know already and not have to decide in that moment what your principles are. That's really the kind of best framework I found for myself in terms of thinking through how to respond in those moments and those opportunities.
Matt Duss, thank you so much for joining us on Block Party.
Great to be here. Love justice, Democrats. Thank you all for your work.
You don't need to compliment us at the end, but I appreciate it. You
Okay.
can just say
you
thank
can cut
so
it out
much
if
for
you
having
want. I'm still gonna say it. You guys are awesome.
Inequality, corruption, oligarchy, and authoritarianism are inseparable. They must be understood as part of the same system and fought in the same way. Around the world, we have witnessed the rise of demagogues who, once in power, use their positions to loot the state of its resources. These kleptocrats, like Putin in Russia, use divisiveness and abuse as a tool for enriching themselves and those loyal to them. In the struggle of democracy versus authoritarianism, we intend to win.
Thank you again to Matt Duss. There's a link to Bernie's foreign policy speech at Westminster College in the show description. But getting back to my original question, I realized that even before the win itself, you could see the primary having an impact, right?
Yes, even before Jamaal won, right? Just the campaign itself moved Eliot Engel to switch his stance on a foreign policy issue, right? He was moved to support Ro Khanna's resolution on ending U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. It's a war that has led to the starvation of 85,000 children. There's so much grotesque violence that has been occurring there. And Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders and others have been pushing this resolution and this conversation forward for a while. And Eliot Engel didn't support it until he was challenged by Jamaal Bowman.
Representative Ro Khanna spearheaded that effort on the resolution to end U.S. support for the war in Yemen. And, after the primary, he talked about the impact of the race in August of this year on the Building the Dream podcast with Corbin Trent.
So do you find that, this sort of progressive movement, the Justice Democrats coalition, that sort of thing, is it helping at this point you to get stuff done, or is it still, adding to the challenge?
I think it's clearly helping. It helped with Yemen when we had more voices come out and highlight it. And I think it's always going to be tricky when people are running against a colleague, an incumbent. That's always difficult. I had to stay out of the Jamaal Bowman race, even though I said nice things, because Eliot Engel literally was the foreign affairs chair, who, if it weren't for him, Yemen legislation wouldn't have gone anywhere. I mean, he had to get it out of his committee. And if Yemen legislation didn't go anywhere, hundreds of thousands of people in Yemen would suffer.
So Rep. Ro Khanna is saying, I can see how the primary challenge gets a chair of a committee to take notice of a progressive resolution. That mattered. But he's also saying, just separate from the primary, it really matters who the chair of House Foreign Affairs Committee is, because you got to move stuff out of committee.
Yep. And that's why it was clear once Engel was going to lose, people were talking even that night about who could run to replace Engel. In terms of what power the chair really has, right? They have tremendous power. They get to shape legislation. They have the power to call hearings on certain subjects, decide on the witness list. And in general, they just, they really shape who is allowed and what is allowed to be discussed. The last Congress, we really saw some incredible committee hearing moments, right? Examples, Katie Porter dragging pharma and finance dudes with her whiteboard.
Effectively, the bank stole this money from 1.7 million consumers nationwide, leaving Wells Fargo sitting on over $600 million in ill-gotten gains.
Or the time earlier this year, Representative Ilhan Omar questioned and indicted President Trump's Venezuela envoy Eliot Abrams, who had been involved in U.S.-backed massacres and in Latin America, as you'll hear in Representative Omar's testimony.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question.
Yeah, that was such a rare moment. Think about the officials who led us into the Iraq war on false information, or the people who approved of torture, right? All of those people in the Bush years, we have never seen them held accountable for their actions. And we don't see them be questioned or criticized in an official forum. And that's why that moment was so shocking and in the best way possible. I was in awe of Rep. Omar, but I was also genuinely scared for her, right? Like the immigrant in me was like, oh my God, they're gonna kill her. What is she doing? Don't say these things.
And think about Eliot Engel being a Democrat who opposed the Iran deal at the end of the Obama presidency, well to the right of Obama and often publicly opposing him. Imagine the constraints that is gonna place on the foreign policy debate when that guy is the chair.
Right. And so when he loses, right, and suddenly changes a lot, like there's this huge opportunity and possibility to change the conversation and really move progressive foreign policy.
Because of the open chair race.
Correct. Right. Like Engel, right. Mr. Hawk, Mr., people think what he's saying is the truth. And then he loses. And everybody's like, wow, actually, there's a lot of room for progressive foreign policy.
And this, it doesn't matter what Jamaal does at this point, right? Because it's like Jamaal can go off and do whatever, but the fact remains HFAC chair cannot run for re-election, got to elect a new one. So I wanted to see if there is a changing foreign policy consensus, if there is a growing progressive foreign policy consensus, maybe we would see that in the race for the chairmanship. And that's why I talked to Yasmine Taeb today. She's a human rights attorney. She has organized for progressive foreign policy for years in D.C. She's now working as a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and leading the campaign to elect Representative Joaquin Castro, who's running as a progressive, to the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Yeah, I mean, this is really exciting. And obviously right now we're talking about the House Foreign Affairs Committee, but Homeland Security, foreign policy, all of these areas that we have traditionally ceded to blue dogs and conservative Democrats and conservatives, we have an actual vision and now we see people engaging, and this is an exciting start.
All right. Next on Block Party, Yasmine Taeb. Amira, see you in the outro?
Maybe, maybe not. But Emily in Paris? Yes or no?
Okay. We'll leave folks in suspense about that.
Promises were made.
I know. Yasmine Taeb, welcome to Block Party.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing today?
Not bad. It's been an interesting couple days with foreign policy nominations from the incoming administration, the Biden administration.
Yeah, how are you feeling about those right now?
So they could have been worse. With respect to Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, as you probably know, this is someone who has been working with Joe Biden for decades. He's actually someone who had reached out to a number of our organizations and progressive advocates, including myself, these last several months to engage progressives on foreign policy. And, that did honestly mean a lot to the groups that were engaging with him regularly. And for that reason, we are looking forward to working with him as a new incoming Secretary of State. And, I think that the choices for the State Department in terms of potentially being Senator Coons or Susan Rice, I think a lot of progressives were kind of feeling like a sigh of relief that, at least with Blinken, it's someone that we've established this good rapport and this relationship with.
Zooming out, obviously, Yasmine, you are in the trenches of the fight against the old foreign policy establishment in Washington, D.C., what some of us might call the Blob. Why choose to be in the trenches organizing against the Blob?
My family and I came here as refugees. We fled the Iran-Iraq war. We've seen firsthand the impacts of war on average citizens. I was in the second grade when we fled Iran. This was in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war, and I have very vivid memories of, I would be sitting at my desk in elementary school, and I was in the first grade. I would hear a siren go off, and we would all, these are little kids, we would all have to round up. We would have to go into these little underground bunkers, until it was safe again for us to come out. There were days I remember coming into class and I would see a red rose next to my desk. That signified like a young child that died in the war. It's incredibly difficult for families that actually go through these experiences. And it could happen to you 20, 25 years ago as a little child, and you'll never forget those experiences. And when my family and I fled, and when we finally left Iran, and the reason why we actually left was because my older brother was about to get drafted. He was about 14, 15 years old at the time. And, one of the common practices used by Iran at the time was to send child soldiers to the forefront at battle. And if we had stayed, it was inevitable that my older brother would have been killed. So my mom did everything she possibly could to get us out of the country safely. So we had tried multiple times to get visas to come to the US because my father was able to secure one and he was already there, and we were trying to join him. And we weren't successful, so we just left the country. We went to Turkey. We were living in Turkey. And again, my mom, consistently tried for us to apply for a visa to come to join my father. And every time we tried, we weren't successful. So finally, she hired someone to help us get across the border. That's the story of so many families who flee violence and persecution, that, we hear about how they're being turned away at the border and have been turned away the past several years, not just during, this past administration, but previous administrations. And my family and I are fortunate. We weren't turned away. So
thank you for sharing that. I can't imagine that it's easy to go to work every day in a town that encourages everyone to treat politics as a game, and yet still find a way to let those feelings of grief or loss or gratitude stay at the surface. But maybe that's something you've figured out as an organizer.
I think, every time I talk about this story, I become emotional. But I think it's because, my family made it. Like my parents are safe, my siblings and I are safe, and we're able to go out and be able to live in peace and tranquility. And there are so many families back at home and in my like home country in Iran that they don't have those same privileges, right? Like why? So the reason why I get emotional is I think about that little child, like he didn't deserve that, and his family didn't deserve that. So I think for the ones of us that work on pushing for progressive foreign policy that, again, prioritizes diplomacy and multilateralism and tries to push to end militarism, this is precisely why, because we see the firsthand effects that war has.
Thank you again, Yasmine, for sharing your story. I'm really excited to hear what you've seen as you have dug into this organizing around the House Foreign Affairs Committee since the primary. Do you think that the upset win Jamaal pulled off against Representative Engel, the political earthquake that he set off in the Bronx and Westchester, has it reverberated through the DC foreign policy establishment in a meaningful way? Like, do we see the dynamics and the politics around the contest to replace Eliot Engel as chair of House Foreign Affairs, have those changed in any meaningful way?
Representative Engel's colleagues in the House, when they saw his defeat, I mean, I guarantee you it just sent shockwaves all across Washington. In terms of the dynamics and why I do believe what's happening right now with this race is just historic, because again, these committee and leadership races, the grassroots has never had any sort of input, right? Nobody ever comes to our organizations or to the advocates and says, hey, can we chat? Can we have a meeting with your groups? Can you, help me in this committee, in this leadership race, right? Like it just doesn't happen. And we're completely ignored and we're kept in the dark. But because of Bowman's race really paved that way and gave our organizations and advocates the opportunity to be able to participate in this process.
Mm-hmm. And that's also happening, though, because progressives seize on the opportunity created by the open chair position on HFAC, right? I mean, take me back to day one of the campaign, to election night. How quickly, in response to Engel losing, do progressives begin to organize?
There are a number of us that were watching this race very closely for months. A number of us were also volunteering and helping out. And as it became very clear the day of his primary that Jamaal was going to be successful, on that day, I pitched an idea to my colleagues at Win Without War that, hey, I think we should do a similar letter to what we had done, earlier in the summer or spring in May that we sent to the Biden campaign about, 10 key foreign policy principles that progressives would like to see from the incoming Biden administration. We eventually had 70 organizations sign on to it that went to House Dem leadership on what we'd like to see in the next chair. So what we did in terms of next steps was we wanted to have a forum with the candidates. So I sent invites, again, to all three of them on behalf of our coalition, and Representative Castro, again, was the only contender running for HFAC chair that accepted the invitation. He came and spoke before our coalition. And eventually it got to a point where we started strategizing with our key partners, wanting to know if it made sense for our organizations to endorse someone for the race. I mean, we felt as though if we were serious about putting our weight behind a candidate and doing everything we possibly can and showing the might of the grassroots, that we absolutely should.
So how has Representative Joaquin Castro continued to distinguish himself as the progressive in contrast to his competitors, Representative Gregory Meeks and Representative Brad Sherman?
So Representative Brad Sherman of California likes to present himself as the most progressive contender running for HFAC chair, which a lot of us would, disagree with. Representative Meeks has been, for the most part, supportive of many of the policies that our organizations have been supportive of. He's a strong supporter of reentry and JCPOA. The issues that many progressives have with Representative Meeks is, his support for various trade deals and not prioritizing workers' rights, and again, his kind of connections to like corporate interests and special interests. And I would say Representative Castro has distinguished himself in a way where not only is he running a transparent and engaging race, which the other two candidates are not, he again has made a number of commitments to progressives. I think one of them in particular that Representative Castro has told us that he supports war powers reform legislation that would strengthen Congress's role in authorizing and overseeing the use of force. He also voted for an amendment, a provision to the annual defense bill that was offered by Representative Barbara Lee and Representative Pocan. The same amendment was also offered in the Senate by Senator Sanders, and it was actually the top priority for the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and in terms of what they wanted to see in the defense bill. And once the amendment failed, and this is the amendment Representative Castro supported, CPC members were whipping against passage of the defense bill.
That sounds quite unprecedented to have Congressional Progressive Caucus members whip against a defense bill that I believe in the past might have sailed through because an amendment to cut the Pentagon budget by 10% gets voted down. Is that as unprecedented as as I think it is?
No, you're right. So, and in the past, it's, our allies, progressives in the House, felt kind of burned by the process that various progressive amendments that passed out of the House were stripped out during conference and never made it into the final bill. So the Congressional Progressive Caucus kind of adopted this new strategy this past year that they would focus on this one priority, this was their top priority, this one amendment that they wanted. And and they told CPC members to vote against the defense bill, and that's obviously something that didn't go unnoticed by Chairman Smith of the House Armed Services Committee, who to his credit, he has been reaching out to our organizations. They're already starting early for next year and trying and hoping that they would get more support from progressive organizations and Congressional Progressive Caucus members in support of the final passage of the defense bill next year.
All right, thank you. Last question. Our listeners will be hearing this episode on Thursday, the day of the HFAC vote. If Representative Castro becomes the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, it would be quite a neat ending for this episode. The Bowman's unprecedented defeat of the old HFAC chair, and now a new progressive taking the chairmanship.
That would be great.
That would be great. But if it doesn't go our way, if Castro loses, and we hear from folks in the Blob who might say, well, I think it goes to show that Engel's defeat was not really about foreign policy, did not open up space for a new progressive foreign policy, and I think you see that in Castro losing his bid for HFAC chairmanship. What would you say to that interpretation of his potential loss?
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with that assessment because even if Representative Castro is not successful, just the fact that, again, we're having this conversation, the fact that this campaign exists, the fact that tens of thousands right now have written to their members of Congress urging that their House member vote for Castro, you know, the fact that this race has gotten so much attention in the press just shows you that Bowman's primary obviously was successful. Not only did he defeat, the current chair of the committee, Engel, but he is the reason that we're having these conversations. And, you know, I also don't want to completely ignore the fact that Representative Meeks is, you know, incredibly popular. I would say he has a lot of support from members in the Congressional Black Caucus, right? And he's someone that, for the most part, is kind of a mainstream Dem on foreign policy issues. And he's not Brad Sherman. Brad Sherman is hawkish and unpopular and is going to come, last. So I don't want to completely ignore the fact that Representative Castro is, running against someone who's much more senior than him, right? Who's well liked by his colleagues and kind of knows how to play this game. So,
and if Brad Sherman comes in third place, should we take that as a victory against the Blob? Do you also think that represents a shift?
Absolutely.
Say more.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Representative Sherman's policies are more in line with the outgoing chair. So the fact that he's going to come dead last will show you that that's just a repudiation, a complete rejection of kind of the old way of thinking on foreign policy and kind of the right-wing policies that even some members in our own in the House Dem Caucus have been supporting. So,
Yasmine Taeb, thank you so much for your work in the belly of the Blob, and good luck this week in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to Yasmine Taeb for her insight and for sharing her story with us, reminding me that a lot of the young leaders who are leading the fight in DC, in the belly of the Blob, are the children of families who fled war, who have fled the worst of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, I'm so thankful to her and to Matt for joining us. And it is, to me personally, one of the hardest and most challenging policy areas, because it's just absolutely depressing to know that when you speak with moral clarity, you are not serious, because you're not speaking in the right terms that are dictated by the Blob, by, DC consensus. And I really commend everybody taking progressive foreign policy and moving it into the progressive conversation and is holding the line on it in a way that we've never seen before, right? Back in the day, you could be really, really a staunch, progressive in the domestic field, and you could get away with not really being very progressive when it comes to foreign policy. So we're seeing a lot of changes, and that makes me hopeful.
Back in the day, the Obama presidency.
Back in the day, 3 years ago.
Right. I guess that's what this episode was about. Yeah. And, since we recorded, there's been news that has broken, I think showing that having an open race for the chair of House Foreign Affairs Committee has been an opportunity for more organizations, more constituencies to openly endorse a progressive foreign policy. Axios was reporting that several labor unions, CWA, the Teamsters, United Brotherhood of Carpenters, all signed a statement urging House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to oppose Meeks in his bid for HFAC chair, saying his stances on trade should prevent him from being elected to the powerful position.
And today, as you're listening to this podcast, the Democratic caucus will be voting on the new HFAC chair. Earlier this week, Democratic leadership made it clear that their preference was Rep. Meeks, but in the summer, it was seen like Rep. Sherman, who is cut from the same cloth as Eliot Engel, was the front runner and had seniority. So this open race, groups getting involved, actually really moved a lot of what was seen as a lock thing for Sherman, and now he had to drop out. So movement.
Mm-hmm. Well, the most hawkish guy dropped out. House leadership still picking the guy the unions just criticized. Well, that's all we know for now. I think that's it. All right.
No. I'm reclaiming my time. I was promised, okay? I was lured to this podcast.
Oh,
yeah, okay. I don't know, Guido, you keep being like, Amira, come on this podcast. Wow. It'll be fun. And, you're so great, butters me up. And then he just uses me for my daytime job. This is, I have a lot to offer. I am more than just my congressional, resume. I know a lot about pop culture.
We know.
It should be used. That's all I'm saying. It should be used.
I know. We said yes in the intro. We said yes. We're excited about the Festivus special. And, you're doing a great job promoting it. Intro, outro, you're ready. You're like, hey, I got a plug.
Yeah. I mean, listen.
So we're all excited for you to host that show, Amira. Take the mic.
It's a Waleed Amira mashup. He'll talk about Lincoln and I'll talk about Real Housewives. All right. Get ready.
We'll have to workshop that more with our producer. Okay, if you would like to tell us your thoughts on Emily in Paris or anything else, you can email us at blockpartypod@gmail.com. Thanks, Amira.
Bye.
Becca Rose is our producer. Leslie Gassenbert is our mix engineer. The guy with the aux cord DJing the party is Jeremy Flood. Special thanks to Amy Westervelt and Michael Catano, as always. See you on the block.